The scent of cinnamon and brown sugar used to be the smell of happiness in our house. It was the aroma of safety, of lazy Sunday mornings, of my mother's love made tangible. For as long as I could remember, our kitchen had been the heart of our home, and my mother, Sarah, was its unwavering pulse. She was a woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a seemingly endless capacity for kindness. My father, Mark, was her steady counterpart, a quiet, reliable man whose world revolved around his two girls, me, Emily, and my older sister, Chloe. Chloe was my hero. 4 years my senior, she was everything I aspired to be, confident, sharp-witted, and effortlessly cool. She had our father's analytical mind and our mother's warm smile, a combination that made her both formidable and deeply loved. We shared a bedroom until I was 10, and in those years, she was my protector from imagined monsters under the bed and the very real complexities of childhood. She'd whisper secrets to me in the dark, secrets about boys she liked, friends who had annoyed her, dreams she harbored of becoming a graphic designer. I was her vault, and she was mine. Trust wasn't something we discussed, it was the air we breathed. Our family wasn't wealthy, but we were comfortable. My father worked as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing firm, a job he'd held for 20 years. My mother had poured her heart and a small inheritance from her own mother into starting, Sweet Serendipity, a charming bakery that had become a local favorite. It was her dream, and we were all invested in it. I worked the counter on weekends, and Chloe, after finishing her business degree, had started handling the books. She had a head for numbers that the rest of us lacked, and it felt like a natural, perfect fit. We were a team. The first crack in our idyllic foundation was so fine it was almost invisible. I was home from college for the summer, reveling in the familiar comfort of my childhood room. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in hushed, tense tones in the kitchen. I caught snippets. Overdraft protection, supplier payments, how is this possible? I padded downstairs. Everything okay? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. My mother turned, her smile a little too quick, a little too bright. Everything's fine, honey, just some boring bakery paperwork. My father didn't look up from the spreadsheet in front of him. His brow was furrowed. Sarah, the numbers just don't add up. We had a great quarter. The foot traffic is up. This shouldn't be happening. It's probably just a lag in the system, Mark, my mom said, her voice soothing. Or I made a mistake with the inventory again. You know I'm hopeless with all this. She waved a hand dismissively at the papers. Chloe's been going over everything. I'm sure she'll figure it out. The mention of Chloe's name settled my own mild anxiety. Of course, Chloe would figure it out. Chloe always figured everything out. The following month saw a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The easy laughter that used to fill our house became a little more strained. My father started working later, and the worry lines on my mother's face seemed to deepen permanently. When I asked Chloe about it, she was her usual, composed self. It's just a cash flow hiccup, she said, not looking up from her laptop. She was always on her laptop now. Running a small business is tough. There are always ups and downs. Mom just needs to be a little more disciplined with her spending on supplies, that's all. I'm helping her get it all organized. It made sense. My mother was generous to a fault, often giving away day-old pastries or giving regulars a little extra. It was part of her charm, but maybe not the best business practice. I felt a pang of sympathy for Chloe, having to be the responsible one, the bearer of bad news. Then, the real storm hit. It was a bleak Tuesday in November. The sky was the color of lead, and a cold rain lashed against the windows. I was home for Thanksgiving break, and the four of us were in the living room, a rare, quiet moment. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound. My father answered it. 2 men in serious, dark suits stood on our porch. They were from the IRS. The next hour was a blur of terrifying, incomprehensible words. Substantial discrepancies, unreported income, audit, potential embezzlement. My mother looked like she'd been physically struck. Embezzlement, that's impossible. It's a small bakery. It's just me and my family. One of the agents, a man with a kind but unyielding face, slid a folder across the coffee table. The transactions we're investigating were funneled through a separate account, ma'am. Under the business's IN, but not its primary business account. Our records show the electronic filings were made from this IP address. He gestured around our home. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. What separate account? My father asked, his voice hollow. It was then that I looked at Chloe. She had been unnervingly quiet throughout the entire exchange. She sat in the armchair, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. But her knuckles were white. Her face, usually so expressive, was a mask of calm, but her eyes were darting around the room, never landing on anyone for too long. "Chloe," my mother whispered, her voice breaking. "You handle the books. Do you know anything about this?" The silence that followed was the loudest, most suffocating sound I have ever heard. It stretched, pulling at the seams of our family, tearing apart the very fabric of our shared history. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "It was a mistake." "What was a mistake?" my father pressed, his tone sharp with a fear I'd never heard before. I was trying to help. I was going to pay it back. I just needed a loan. A temporary loan from the business. The words tumbled out, a weak, pathetic defense. "A loan," my mother echoed, disbelief rendering her almost speechless. "A loan for what? How much, Chloe?" When Chloe named the figure, the room spun. It was a number that was impossible to comprehend, a number that wasn't just a temporary setback but a cataclysm. It was more than the bakery was worth. It was more than my parents' life savings. The details emerged in broken, painful fragments over the next few days, pulled from Chloe like rotten teeth. It wasn't a single loan. It was a systematic, 2-year-long siphoning of funds. She had created fake vendor invoices, inflated supply costs, and diverted customer payments into a shadow account she controlled. The cash flow hiccups were the moments she couldn't cover her tracks quickly enough. And what did she need this temporary loan for? It wasn't for medical bills or a secret gambling addiction. It was for a lifestyle. Designer handbags she hid in her closet, luxury weekend trips she told us were work retreats, a sports car she leased and parked in a garage across town, expensive dinners with a boyfriend we had never met, a man she had convinced she was a successful, independent entrepreneur. The betrayal was so profound, so layered, it was like discovering the sun was cold. The person I had shared my deepest secrets with, the person I had looked up to my entire life, was a stranger. She hadn't just stolen money, she had stolen my parents' security, my mother's dream, and the unshakable trust that had been the bedrock of our family. The confrontation that followed was a raw, ugly explosion of grief and rage. It happened in the same kitchen that had once smelled of cinnamon and happiness. "How could you?" my mother sobbed, her body trembling. "This bakery was my mother's legacy. It was for all of us. How could you look me in the eye every day and lie to me? I was going to pay it back." Chloe cried, her composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face, but they sparked no sympathy in me, only a cold, hard fury. I had a plan. I was investing it. I was going to triple it and put it all back before anyone even noticed. "Investing it?" my father roared, his voice cracking. "You bought Prada bags and went to Vegas, Chloe. Don't you dare insult us by lying anymore." I stood frozen by the doorway, watching the two pillars of my world crumble. I found my voice, small and shaking. "You let me believe it was Mom's fault. You let me think she was bad with money." Chloe turned her desperate gaze to me. "Emily, please, you have to understand. I felt so trapped. I had this degree, this potential, and I was just working in a bakery. I deserved more than this." Those words, "I deserved more than this," hung in the air like poison gas. They meant she deserved more than us. More than our simple, loving, ordinary family. The final piece of my sister, the hero I had constructed in my mind, shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. She was asked to leave that night. My father, his face ashen with a heartbreak I knew would never fully heal, told her she was no longer welcome in our home. She packed a single suitcase, her movements slow and mechanical. She tried to catch my eye as she walked out the door, but I turned away. I couldn't look at her. The trust was gone, and in its place was a void, a howling emptiness. The aftermath was a long, gray winter. The bakery was lost. My parents had to sell it for a fraction of its worth to settle the debts with the IRS and avoid more severe legal consequences. They decided, in a move that broke my mother's heart a second time, not to press charges against their own daughter. It was a mercy I didn't understand and struggled to forgive. My father aged a decade in a few months. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a constant, weary anxiety. He took on a second job, his shoulders perpetually stooped under the weight of a shame he didn't deserve to carry. My mother was the hardest to watch. The vibrant, joyful woman who could light up a room with her smile simply faded. She moved through the house like a ghost, her hands, once constantly dusted with flour, now idle and listless. She'd sometimes stand at the window for hours, staring at nothing. The scent of baking, once so central to our lives, was now a painful memory, a ghost we all avoided. I went back to college, but I was a different person. The cheerful, optimistic Emily was gone, replaced by a cynical, guarded young woman who found it hard to connect with anyone. How could you trust people when the person you trusted most had been living a lie right in front of you? I threw myself into my studies, using the workload as a shield against the grief that threatened to consume me. My friendships suffered. I couldn't explain the chasm that had opened up in my life, the shame of what my sister had done. A year passed. The sharp, acute pain of the betrayal dulled into a constant, heavy ache. We were a family of 3, moving around each other in a house that felt too big and too quiet. We never talked about Chloe. Her name was a landmine we all carefully avoided. Then, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, in Chloe's familiar, looping handwriting. My first instinct was to tear it up, unread. But a morbid curiosity, or perhaps a lingering, stupid flicker of hope, made me open it. It was not an excuse. It was not a justification. It was 10 pages of raw, unvarnished confession. She described her descent in painful detail. The initial, small, dip into the funds to cover a credit card bill, the terrifying ease with which she did it, the intoxicating rush of having money, of being able to keep up with her wealthy friends. She wrote about the shame that would follow, a shame so powerful that the only way to silence it was to spend more, to build the facade so high she could almost believe it herself. She described the moment she realized I suspected my mother was at fault, and the gut-wrenching cowardice that kept her silent. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she knew it was too much to ask. She was in therapy, she wrote, finally confronting the deep-seated insecurity and narcissism that had allowed her to do what she did. She had gotten a job as a waitress, was living in a small studio apartment in a city 2 states away, and was sending every spare cent she had to a repayment account for our parents. It wasn't about the money anymore, she wrote. It was about the act, about forcing herself to look at what she had done every single day. The letter ended with, "I miss you, Emily." Not the me I was, but the us we were. I know I destroyed it. I have to live with that. I just needed you to know that I am sorry, with a depth I didn't know I was capable of. I was sick, and my sickness infected our whole family. I am trying, every day, to get well. I cried as I read it. I cried for the sister I lost, for the pain she had caused, and for the broken person she had become. The letter didn't magically fix anything. The trust wasn't suddenly restored. But it was a start. It was the first honest thing she had given me in years. I showed the letter to my parents. My father read it in stony silence, then handed it back and walked away. But my mother sat with it for a long time. I saw a single tear trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't the same as the hysterical sobs from before. It was quieter, sadder, and perhaps held a tiny, fragile seed of something else. Things didn't change overnight, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to shift. We started talking about it, tentatively at first. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a silent, suffocating force. We were grieving together, finally. My mother started baking again. It was just a simple loaf of banana bread at first, but the smell that filled the house was no longer a painful ghost, it was a declaration of survival. 6 months later, on a bright spring day, my mother told me she had received a postcard from Chloe. It had no return address, just a picture of a mountain landscape and 2 words, "Still trying." My mother looked at it for a long moment, then placed it on the mantelpiece. It wasn't an invitation back into our lives. It was an acknowledgement, a small, painful, but necessary step. I learned that trust isn't a single, solid entity you give someone. It's a fragile, living thing that can be shattered in an instant. But I also learned that family is messy and complicated, and that love, even when broken, has a stubborn way of persisting. The betrayal changed everything. It broke our family apart and forced us to rebuild from the ground up. The new family we are building is different. It's scarred, it's cautious, and the trust we have is no longer blind or effortless. It's a choice, a conscious decision made every day, tempered by the fire of what we lost. I trusted someone close, my own sister, and it changed everything. It taught me a brutal lesson about the darkness that can reside in the people we love most. But in the ruins, it also taught me about resilience, about the slow, painful work of forgiveness, not for her, but for us. And it taught me that even after everything has been broken, you can still find a way to pick up the pieces and build something new, something that, while forever marked by the past, is still capable of holding love.